Mr. and Madam Speaker, there's a grave problem that we face today, and it is high time we do something about it. And I will firstly be telling you about the problem that the refugees of the world are facing right now. The highly anti-refugee sentiment that is growing and that is causing multiple deaths of refugees. And then I will be telling you about how fundamentally the reason for migration for both the refugees and the economic migrants is really not so different. It's mostly the same. And then I'll be talking about thereby what are the benefits of removing this barrier between refugees and economic migrants, seeing them as one and seeing them as agents providing economic benefit to the country that they're going to. So let's talk about the problem, right? So the anti-refugee sentiment is the one we see the problem in. So what we see right now is more than 2 million refugees out at sea or out at land, roaming around, not without a land to go, right? We see the Syrian refugees not being accepted by the European nations. Hungary and Greece have explicitly stopped accepting refugees. The Rohingyans are not being accepted by Australia and Indonesia. And this is highlighting this anti-refugee sentiment. And we feel that we are unable to overcome it. And even for countries which have not been anti-refugee over the past, like Sweden, in the recent polls, 60 to 70% of the population has this growing anti-refugee sentiment. So there's something going wrong. This growing sentiment is making them see as leechers. It's making them see as the agents who just come into the country, take their resources away, take the welfare away. And this is something, this labeling and sentiment that we need to change. Now, let's talk about how are these economic agents, how are these economic migrants and refugees so different after all? We tell you they are not, because the intent to migrate, the intent they're moving is exactly the same. They are both looking to escape the dilapidating conditions at home. So we tell you, if the person in Syria who is fleeing there because he is threatened by Assad, he is in an environment where there's bombing and there's threat to his life and security, it is no different, there is no difference from a person moving from another nation who is struggling to put food for his family on the table at night, where the income is so low that he is not being able to provide for his family. He is being threatened the same way as far as his right to life and security is concerned. Now, what about the future, right? They're both looking for a safe and secure future. The safe economic and social atmosphere without facing the barriers of lack of infrastructure, lack of societal integration. So this is exactly what both of them are facing, the social security, which is especially important for refugees, that they're not under attack the whole time. So this, looking for safe and secure future, again, we do not see anything different there. Now, the third thing we see is that they are both have the opportunities, they are looking for opportunities to maximize their potential. We already know that all of these refugees who are right now rotting in refugee camps, a lot of them are doctors, they're Syrian doctors, there's so many qualified people. Even if not, the lesser qualified people still have skills which can be useful. They are looking to maximize their potential, they are looking to work, but right now they are not being, because there is so much pressure from the public to the government that this is something that is not their problem, these are leechers, we can't do anything about that. So what do we see as the solution, and why do we feel that it's better to remove this distinction between the refugees and economic migrants? Because at the point we eliminate these distinctions, the people in the country, the refugees, would see the refugees as good economic vehicles, and that is the greatest distinction, Madam Speaker and Mr. Speaker, because these agents would be seen as contributing to the economy, and this is our first step to reduce the stigma around refugees leeching off the country. And why is this so important? Because the principle is, if you're providing value to the society has an obligation to provide for you as well. They are functioning members of the society, and hence not only is the government obliged to provide for them, the local population would be more willing to accept them. This is our second point, that the social integration, which is right now so lacking, how refugee camps set up in the forests, in the extremities of these countries who are even accepting them, those people are facing such lack of social integration. And this is our first step to make these functioning members of the society, make them accepted by the locals, and hence provide for the removal of stigma and greater social integration. And we tell you that this can be done by simply, so this is not mutually exclusive with calling for help. If there is an issue in the country that they're coming from, countries can still call for humanitarian organizations. Countries can still call for UN's help. All that we are removing is when these people do come in, there is no label of refugees, there's no label of leechers, and so that we can better integrate them into society and we can better remove the stigma that around them. So we highlight our comparative that we want to take away the label of leechers from the refugees, provide them with a label of good economic vehicles, and marginally move them. Yeah, sure.
So consider that in many first world countries, the notion of xenophobia against foreign migrants anyway exists because these people are seen as competitors for jobs.
Exactly. We completely agree. What we have provided to you is that the xenophobia against against economic migrants versus refugees. Clearly, refugees who are not being able to provide any benefit, who are just taking away the welfare without providing any benefit, is what is taking away, which is what the real stigma is. On your side, the stigma is still there. So like, there's no solution coming there, and we would love to get a solution. Right now, at least people are realizing that when, let's say, Indians or Bangladeshis go there, they do construction workers' job, they do taxi workers' job. So there is a greater awareness that they're not taking away our jobs. The thing with the refugees is they're not doing any jobs, they're just taking the welfare and the state's money. So we agree that there is growing xenophobia, but we feel that the discrimination against refugees is so much that many people are dying every day, so many people out on the streets. We do not provide for them something we need to provide for them. The label as leechers needs to be taken away. We need to make them the good economic vehicles and work towards that. And with that, I'm actually proud to close.
Mr. Madam Speaker, throughout the 7 minutes of the Prime Minister, he told us 3 things. First of all, he said that economic migrants and refugees are essentially the same thing, except that refugees are dying. Secondly, he says that we need to reduce the stigma surrounding the refugees, right? And lastly, he says that refugee camps suck, essentially, and that we need some sort of social integration to help you do that. We fully agree, right, that we need some sort of social integration to help with both the economic migrants and the refugees. But we don't think that the solution brought forth by government in this case, that of arbitrarily removing this kind of distinction, is therefore something that will necessarily work. Why is that so? I present to you 2 problems in today's debate. First of all, we think that in direct contrast to what Prime Minister wants you to believe, we think that refugees are in fact necessarily different from economic migrants in the first place, right? While they present to you an idea that both of them are escaping the country for a better living, and we agree. We think that in the initial motivations behind escaping the country is very different, right? For an economic migrant, they could possibly find another kind of job opportunity that may be less, that may pay less in their own country. But it's not a necessary thing for them to migrate into these countries. It's a necessary choice on their part. We don't think that there's such a choice presented to refugees in this case. It's simply a matter of life and death for them, right? Whether they stay in that country and be persecuted and probably lose their lives or leave in search for a better life. We think that these kind of distinctions is something that's very important and the ones that Prime Minister doesn't want to show you. Right? So we think that this kind of political status that they are refugees is very important, right? Because we think that this actually allows you to provide some sort of crucial resources, as I will explain to you why this is the case in my constructive material. We think that it's also like when you arbitrarily push economic migrants and refugees together, what you're doing is you're subjecting them to the economic needs of the country, and we posit to you that this is actually far worse, right, for refugees and economic migrants as a whole, right? And lastly, we think that the second problem in this case is that refugees are often seen as a burden to the state. This is why there's this kind of wave of anti-refugee sentiment, right? Because they're seen as taking resources that could be directed to the people away from there. And we think that this is actually very important, and we want to break this kind of stigma, right? So this is the actual solution. It's not to blend economic migrants and refugees together, but to recognize that there's a stigma behind these refugees and how best we can solve it. We don't think they do that, right? No, thank you. How are we going to do this? Policy. First of all, we think we're going to call, what we want to do is obviously to call for greater integration of refugees into these countries. We think that countries who need these resources can be provided by, for example, the UN High Commission of Refugees, or in the case of the EU, for things such as the Dublin regulations, which states that refugees, the first country they're going to must accept them. Right? We think that another way we can do this is tackle xenophobia head on. Right? What we understand is that xenophobia is not mutually exclusive to refugees, as Prime Minister himself has already conceded to you. We think that you cannot be half-assed in this situation, right? What we want to do is, for example, in the case of Norway, have education classes, all our education classes, teaching them language, teaching them sort of differences and nuances of culture, to be able to let them integrate into these kind of communities, right? And we think that, for example, in the case of Canada, where they humanize these refugees by allowing for rich neighborhoods to adopt, for example, refugees and integrate them into this community. We don't think this can actually happen on the side of government, and I'll tell you why in my two main points of constructive, right? And I'll blend my rebuttals into it. First of all, how economic policies actually shape immigration patterns, and secondly, how we can tackle the social inclusion of refugees. Now, first of all, how do economic policies actually shape immigration patterns? We think that, for example, in cases of economic migrants, they pander to the economic needs of a country, right? What does this mean in this case? We think that what happens for these kind of economic migrants is that they are granted entry based on the kind of utility they can provide to the economy, right? In this case, what the necessary corollary of this is that if you are deemed useless economically to a country, you'll therefore not be granted entry in the first place. And we think that this is especially pernicious for refugees when you blend them together as economic migrants, right? Because refugees have already been, first of all, refugees that have been therefore deemed useless, right, will therefore not be allowed, will continue to be rejected from these countries in the first place. What they want to paint to you a rosy picture of how all refugees will now be allowed isn't going to happen, because the same thing already happens for economic migrants. Not everyone is allowed into the country, right? And this is especially pernicious because lives are still put in danger in this case. They don't solve the problem of how we can best save lives of the refugees.
Clarification.
Yes.
The crisis is still visible to the whole of the international community. That Syria is fought is still visible to all Western democracies. That doesn't go away. People are still accepted based on migrant cause.
Yeah, sure. We fully agree, yes. And we think that especially when you try to remove this kind of arbitrary distinction in this case, as I'll tell you later in my second point, you don't actually remove the stigma that there are still refugees coming from these countries, right? The kind of distinction they are trying to, the kind of stigma that you try to remove still doesn't get solved under your paradigm. Right. The second thing, moving back, the second thing is that we think that this especially disenfranchises women and children refugees, who are usually the ones disproportionately deemed economically unviable, economically burdensome. Right? We think that these kind of people are the ones that will continue to be rejected under the paradigm where refugees are seen as economic migrants. Children obviously don't provide any sort of economic value to a country in this case. Right? So we think that this is not great. And the last thing, when they want us to really talk about qualifications, we think that for the most part, at the end of the day, most refugees still don't have this kind of necessary qualifications that they want you to believe, right? We think that the bulk of refugees are still the ones who don't have these qualifications and therefore will not be allowed entry. And we think the impact of this whole argument is that less refugees will now be admitted into the country, especially when they now have to compete for places with these economic migrants in the first place, right? We don't think they solve the problem on their side and make it worse. How do we then include refugees socially? So we have already talked to you about this kind of arbitrary distinction, how it's important to break the stigma. But we think that this is important because on the comparative, we think that economic migrants are already equally stigmatized in this case, right? They're seen as competing for jobs. They're seen as job stealers, taking up precious job opportunities that could be given to the locals instead. And we think that just because you try and remove this kind of arbitrary distinction under their side, we don't think people on the ground are necessarily going to therefore think that everyone now is an economic migrant. If we take DPM's characterization that people can still tell that Syria is under civil war and there are refugees there, just a person coming from Syria will still be seen as a refugee, but under their case will not also be seen as someone who's stealing the economic opportunities from the people. And we think that this is bad because this does not help integration at all. We're very proud to oppose.
Mr. Speaker, the fact that the Leader of Opposition calls this distinction arbitrary and something that is not real calls for the fact that this distinction needs to be removed. I'm going to do multiple things in this debate. Firstly, I'm going to deal with their side and talk about why the intent, even the intent and the point of making it to another country, at one time where the conditions of your country are far worse than the country you're moving to, is the same for both refugees and economic migrants. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why the distinction at the ground with respect to the people who see these people day to day in the society will be changed, whereas with respect to the governments who are taking in refugees, who are taking in people who are disbanded by crisis, does not change. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about why the fact that women and children won't be accepted is absolutely naive and something that we should not consider. Let me get straight into it, right? Firstly, they tell us that, oh, but the intent to move is entirely different because people might find jobs in their home countries that might pay them less. They're not talking about people like me. We're not talking, this debate is not about people like me who are looking for better meritocratic opportunities outside that might not be available to them in their home countries. The debate is about people who are literally starving to make 2 ends meet at the end of the day in their home countries. The debate is about people who do not have enough social and economic welfare allocated to them by these underdeveloped or developing nations that they can live a life of subsistence in the first place. The debate is about people who literally are moving to make 2 ends meet for the families back home or the families that they take with them. I see no difference in the moral culpability of countries taking both these people in with respect to the person who might be under siege from Assad versus the person who will literally die within a week if he's not given a day-to-day welfare or a day-to-day job to do. We tell you that this distinction is therefore mandatory or something that we should call for removal, because we tell you that the moral culpability with respect to the intent of moving to another countries is the same for both parties. But what does he tell us? He tells us we can remove the ideology and we can have governments calling upon their populations to be more accepting of refugees. I tell you, when a person like Viktor Orban in fucking Hungary goes out and says that refugees are fucking sinners and you should not take them in, we are the Orthodox Church and we got to do nothing with these Muslims who are coming in, I tell you, that's a far more xenophobic idea coming from their side. At least on our side, we make it marginally better with the people on the ground, see them as economic vehicles providing some kind of value to society. We tell you, in countries like Europe, within Europe and the United States of America or Western liberal democracies, there are far better value when they're allowed and mandated to work in lower level jobs, which might be beneficial firstly for them and secondly for the society who's unwilling to do these jobs in the first place. We tell you it's far better that these people, the stigma around these people as refugees coming from crisis and bringing like their religious ideologies, etc. with them is removed. We tell you that the point of time when people in the society view these people as a communal or as a homogeneous set of people who can provide economic value to society in and of itself, economic value to the nation of itself. We tell you that all other reasons for exacerbating xenophobia and exacerbating religious exacerbation against them will be removed, because at the point of time they see a benefit or like a marginally some benefit that comes from them versus them sitting idle in refugee camps and leeching off welfare is something that we on our side can only provide. We tell you it doesn't work that UNHCR goes to goes to every house and says that you might be willing, that you should be willing to do something or do something for the refugees. Really, that's not how things work. Because at the point of time, UNHCR goes and do this, we tell you that the mindsets of the psychological mindset these people have, or the perceptions these people create within themselves with respect to refugees who are coming in is very much different from the kind of things that UNHCR can propagate. We tell you that the humanitarian call and the moral culpability should only be to the nation states and the heads of states who are making the decision as to what economic policies to run. We tell you at that point of time, where the crises are heavily prevalent and heavily in the news for people who are seeing them with respect to the policies that they're changing, it doesn't change the kind of humanitarian moral culpability of those people at the very head of the nation state. But on the ground, people literally can't make distinctions as to whether you're a refugee from a crisis or you're just a taxi driver coming from India or Bangladesh. We tell you the people on the ground do not see that form that the person submits with I'm coming from a crisis or moving as a refugee from the crisis versus I'm coming from better economic opportunities. We tell you that the only distinction that matters is for people on the ground. We tell you that the nation state can still call upon the moral principles of taking these refugees in, and it's something that we only on our side can provide. Sure, go ahead.
So when these refugees under your side are now seen as both an economic burden and a kind of social burden, right? Because these kind of the perceptions don't change on the ground. Now, how will your anti-refugee rhetoric cease to exist?
Okay, literally right now, I just told you how this changes. Because the only people who can see whether they're economic migrants or refugees are people at the very top or people in administration who see that form. The people on the ground literally cannot see that distinction between the two groups. They're homogenized to become one, but as part of the economic vehicle that drives some contribution to society. We tell you that your conception in your head that people can see everybody and where they come from and why they have come here is literally false. Okay, calming down. Yeah, moving ahead to the second point, right? They tell you that refugees won't be allowed because they'll only take in people who can provide some economic benefit. I think that's not true. As I literally told you a few seconds ago, you can still call on for humanitarian principles to the respective heads of nations and states that make those policies, right? Because at the point of time where supranational bodies like the EU or the ASEAN can literally see that these crises are happening within them or near them, we tell you that the humanitarian call from supranational bodies like UN, etc., can mandate these people to take the refugees in. We tell you that the state can still fulfill humanitarian responsibility without giving up on the fact that they need to change perceptions or heavily ideologically disbalance the kind of people or the kind of notions that the people on the ground have. I tell you, but more importantly, at the point of time where the discussion is going on for limiting quotas on the number of refugees you can take or limiting quotas on the number of migrants that you can take, it's far better that these people are looked at as an homogenized group that's coming in to provide some value to society, where these things can then be questioned for the state to not do it in the first place. Where the perceptions change and we can have the questioning of quotas, etc., on the kind of people you can and the amount of people you can take in. But the last thing that they said, fucking women and children, it doesn't work that way. At the point of time you receive a work permit to work in that country, you receive a permit to go ahead and contribute, your family is obviously allowed to come with you. You don't say that, leave your wife and kid behind and just you come. That's not how things work in immigration policies. Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. Let's not let them run away with this naive characterization of how policies and internal politics of countries work, right? At the point of time, we tell you that countries like UK, etc., just are able to close off their borders with respect to having this arbitrary distinction and escape the moral culpability of helping the refugees in the first place. It's far better that you remove this arbitrary distinction and let them be as one homogenized group that's seen better by the society and by the state in and of itself. We're very proud to propose.
I invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
The fundamental notion that side of government has conceded today is a logic of otherization that's used by xenophobic actors as well as xenophobic political parties within a country, right? We think that the logic of otherizing is as follows. As long as you're brown or you're Muslim or you're not part of the majority that forms a kind of alt-right sentiment within the country, we think that regardless of whether you're an economic migrant or refugee, that you will be fundamentally discriminated against within the country. We think this is problematic because we think it worsens endorses the rights of both economic migrants as well as the rights of refugees. Firstly, let's look at the distinction between refugees and economic migrants, right? We think that the fundamental rights between refugees and the fundamental rights of economic migrants is different, right? We think that the rights of refugees, especially accorded by the United Nations Human Rights on Refugees, right? We think there are specific reasons as to why these regulations are in place. Why is this the case? Because there is a moral imperative by states to include these refugees. We think that these refugees are uniquely different from a poor person in their case, right? Because the states fail to provide the basic needs and rights within their own country, right? We think the distinction between migrants in this case is, right, the states can and should provide the rights of a poor person within those countries. If an economic migrant is poor enough in the country, we think the first line of action, instead of escaping the country, right, is to compel the government who can provide resources, to provide resources to them in the first place, right? We think that a state, if it's not embroiled in a state of conflict, the first duty that it owes is towards its own citizens. And we think that economic migrants are less like, have a choice in this case, either to pressurize their governments and actually seek a better life and to equip themselves with whatever meager resources that they have in the case. No, thank you, sir. Then in the case of refugees who do not have, whose basic state infrastructures are not being accorded, right? They have no right to, their basic safety is being threatened. A poor person in, let's say, a developing country, their basic right to life is not being threatened in their case. We think that that's a fundamental difference in their case. Secondly, right, we think what's a danger of reducing this moral imperative on refugees, right? We think that it allows states to use the introduction of refugees under economic policy, right? We think it's very, very insidious, because then it becomes less of a question of whether we should accept refugees as internationally accepted within the United Nations Conventions on Refugees, right? But then it becomes subject to the economic imperatives within a country. And because the country has a duty towards its citizens first, and to fulfill the kind of economic policies needed for a country to work in the first place, we think it's so much more likely in their case to reject a migrant if they do not have the relevant qualifications and the kind of skills that they have in the first place. So we think that's the first issue that we have today. Secondly, no, thank you, sir. Secondly, even if these economic migrants, these refugees fulfill the kind of economic capabilities, right, we think that there are significant rights and kind of responsibilities that refugees need to resettle within a country compared to an economic migrant, right? We think that when an economic migrant applies to a country, they're coming with a set of skills and ability and an assurance that they can work within the normal conditions. This is very different from the rights of refugees, from the conditions of refugees. They are psychologically traumatized by the issue of war. They need significant pastoral care. They need significant language classes. They need significant efforts and education efforts to actually reintegrate. So we think the specific responsibilities that are given under the United Nations refugees is very different from the kind of rights and responsibilities given to an economic migrant. Because in that case, the case is not whether to ensure the basic working rights, because we see that the labor rights within a country differ so vastly that we see that economic migrants being sidelined in most countries, right? We think that unless you have that kind of international pressure, we have very much a case of many refugees being treated as migrant workers and being mistreated in that case too, right? So we think that a significant issue occurs on their side. Yes, sir.
What's a comparative? How do you change the xenophobic idea? And how do you change the idea that refugees are just leeching off you in refugee camps that are absolute leechers in that place?
Thank you for leading me to the next question, right? How do we best solve xenophobia? We think the issue with xenophobia is the notion, firstly, they made the distinction between policymakers and the people on the ground. They somehow said that there'll be a distinction in treatment between refugees and economic migrants in the policymaker side versus the kind of xenophobic masses, right? We tell you that this is not true. We think that in the introduction of alt-right governments in places like Poland and Hungary, we think that people pressurize governments to treat refugees and migrants in the way that they want them to, right? So we think that if you have xenophobic people who fundamentally recognize that there should be no welfare given even to economic migrants, even if you introduce refugees as economic migrants, we think that the policymakers would not have policies that actually that actually ensure the welfare of these economic migrants or refugees in the first place, right? So we think this is harmful. We think it leads to the kind of very exclusionary policies that they claim to be against, right? So we think that this is even more likely to occur on their case because because we think the rising sentiment towards xenophobia will actually add on to the kind of mistreatment of economic refugees as well as refugees in their case. Moving on to my substantive on how the notion of unilateral support in the form of refugees is much better than kind of fragmentary labor divisions that are subject by country, right? We think the significance of the United Nations Conventions of the Refugees is that these are unilaterally set standards. These are standards agreed upon the international community. Why is this important? This is because international bodies such as the Security Council, as well as other regional bodies such as the EU and its Dublin regulations, use that as a basis of the moral imperative to pressurize regional countries and governments, right? We think that in the case of the introduction of economic migrants, these refugees are no longer protected under those laws. They are subject to the differing and vast disparity in economic regulations from country to country. This means that a migrant worker within a country in the EU, right, is completely different. Is treated completely differently than a country in Asia, right? Because we think that there are differing labor standards. What does this mean? We see that the kind of issue that they have with refugee camps, where they are excluded from the rest of society, where they're treated as cattle, where they're more likely to occur in their case, where there are dismal labor conditions. We can have these economic migrants who are refugees, who are not even integrated within the society, being mistreated as economic migrants. We think this is more likely to occur. Why is this the case? Because there is no international accountability by an international body, like in the case of refugees, to treat economic migrants in the way by a common international standard, right? So we think that that moral imperative is reduced. We think that both economic migrants and refugees are very much affected on their side, and that we deal with xenophobia much more accurately in our case. With that, go with side opposite.
Yeah. Up there, go. Up there, go.
And then we get to for the speech. I called out the member of the
Well, it's not a debate, it's not verified. All the fellas see the 5 who got it, so expectations, guys. Alright. Even in my sleep-deprived, befuddled state, the opening house, I don't think they really understand like what exactly causes discrimination against refugees and economic migrants. Okay, so let me explain. If you look different from them, for example, you've got the brown skin of a Turkish person or a Middle Eastern person in Germany. If you believe in Islam, then you wear the hijab, for example. If you share very different cultures about how to treat women in society, or if you speak a different language and have to experience the language barrier, like, look, I'm not passing judgment, I'm Muslim myself, right? But the Germans obviously think differently. So don't give me that look. Right. It could be competition for jobs. It could be the fact that there are sheer numbers of migrants or refugees, millions of them, like wandering the streets of Berlin and Munich and Frankfurt, right? These are all reasons that are independent of the characterization that opening talks about. Right? It's not about a distinction between economic migrants and refugees, because the average person in Berlin looks at an economic migrant and a refugee, it's like, you're all fucking Muslims, you're all the same shit. You're all you all look like economic migrants to me anyway. All of the other reasons that I talked about suggest that regardless of whether we make a distinction or not, the discrimination is going to exist. And at the point in which we are keeping numbers constant, right? It's just a matter of who we take in, not how many we take in. Clearly, you don't see why the hell discrimination is going to be any worse on our side or better on yours. But I'm also going to fill in a couple of holes before about it, opening up the government's case before we move on to the extension for today, right? So I think they've come up with a basic skeletal case about why it's important to help these people and what the reality is and what the alternatives are. But I'm going to elaborate on that. Firstly, economic migrants do suffer, right? But not only because they are poor in general, right? Specifically, I think the world has, they've been hard done by the forces of globalization. So one, that the global economy is often in a downturn, that often MNCs exploit, cheap labor in these countries, like in Thailand, in Myanmar, for instance, in order for them to just provide them with a really small, vague semblance of a living without them actually achieving any sense of decent dignity or economic stability. Right? If you look at workers in Bangladesh, for example, or if you look at workers in Syria or North Africa, for example, there are reasons why they are forced to move over to Europe, precisely because the global economy has disadvantaged them. Even if you don't buy their analysis, we talk about how they've been neglected by their own governments. Welfare policy or political instability, or military coups in Egypt that mean that the economy simply collapses, and that the UN is either incapable or lacks the political will to do anything about the problem. But I think a more immediate problem is the idea that they risk fuck all in order to get to Europe in the first place. They pay their entire life savings to smugglers, and then they've been put onto a rickety wooden boat in the middle of the Mediterranean, forced to swim to the nearest Italian island or the Greek islands, that risk drowning halfway through, and they arrive where they are with nothing on their backs, right? If that process of migration does not render them as much as people who suffer as refugees, I don't know what more suffering you want them to go through, because the journey itself is harrowing enough. But the more important thing is, what is the reality and the alternative, right? Look, it takes decades, years in order to process the refugee applications of millions of people. These refugee camps are understaffed. They have to go through extensive interviews and background checks in order to determine whether you are a legitimate refugee as opposed to an economic migrant, where you come from, all of that stuff, right? In most instances, for example, the Burmese refugees who migrate to Thailand and are stuck in between in refugee camps, millions of them have been stuck for a quarter of a century with no realistic hope of getting out of there. And the refugee camps in Syria and in Greece and in Turkey are likely to look the same way, right? Are you going to stand for millions of these people being trapped in limbo without proper shelter, without proper long-term shelter, without proper food, water, jobs, or any semblance of community life? No, right? Or will you send these millions of people back, right? Which is something that we cannot countenance either. In either scenario, the sort of suffering that they go through and the reality that we have to face, the fact that these millions of people, regardless of whether they're economic migrants or refugees, have already made that journey, means that we've got no choice but to deal with them, or we keep them in limbo like the bastards that the side opposition claims that we ought to be. No, thank you. So I'll take it at 5:30, right? So the extension that I want to talk about, I've got two extensions, right? The first of which is about political instability. So I think we're going to start from the characterization of refugee camps in areas like Greece, Italy, and Turkey. Why are these refugee camps particularly important? Because these are the first frontline states that take in all of these refugees and economic migrants as they migrate to Europe or to whichever the hell place you want to go to, right? And the problem is that these are the countries that are often saddled with the immense financial, political, and geographical burden of having to deal with all of these refugees without any assurance, or economic migrants as well, without any assurance that other countries like France and Germany are going to step up to the plate and take them, right? Maybe Germany more so than France or Denmark or whatever, right? And we don't think that in principle this is fair. We don't think that in practice they've got the tools and the expertise and financial resources necessary to keep these millions of refugees there in the long term, which is precisely what's going to happen under their policy and in the status quo, because no one has the political will to step up to the challenge and do what is necessary. But also what happens if these countries are forced to keep in refugees indefinitely? But before I move on, yes.
We think the issue is not giving refugees an ability to actually get jobs, right? We think we're completely fine with refugees reintegrating within the society. The issue is that you're conflating refugees with the same rights of economic migrants.
Okay, so let me explain the rest of my substantive and I'll tell you why your POI should be relevant, okay? So what happens if these countries are unable financially or politically to keep these refugees in these camps for the long term, right? As a result, the sort of far-right politics that they want to talk about on their side exists to an even larger degree in these border countries, which means that ultimately your ability to handle these refugees breaks down, right? It also means, therefore, that they are much less willing to keep these refugees where they are. For Greece, for example, they're more than happy to send these refugees upwards because of the EU Schengen Treaty to France or Germany or Austria, right, where they are going to cause even more political tensions and threaten the stability of multinational unions or even just countries in general, like the European Union. This is all relevant because they're spending fucking decades trying to determine the difference between a fucking refugee and economic migrant, despite the fact that principally and practically, they mean roughly the same thing. Sure, they may not be shot to death in their home countries, but everything that has happened to them ever since they decided to set foot on their journey makes them as much members who have suffered in society as everyone else. And that is why we think it is important, for the sake of political stability, not only for these individual countries, but for regions as a whole, in general stability as well as working working to solve the refugee problem as fast as possible, for them to not make this distinction and come up with a far more efficient and humane policy to ensure that the world is a better place for both refugees and economic migrants alike.
Valerie!
Something to me is very puzzling. So they argue that, say, people who work in Bangladesh who have no income in their countries, very shitty life, but they cannot take work permit, man. Like, work permit doesn't exist in our world, man. They are still going to be employed in these developed countries if they apply for work permits, right? So legally, these people who are going to be economic migrants on their side, who are in shitty situations, will still get employed. If we talk about refugees and the way the perceive of refugees and the rhetoric that is implemented and imposed upon rhetorics on their side, right? We argue that the economic migrants who still have an economic purpose will still be around. But the problem lies with placing a transactional value on refugees and turning refugees into economic units. Because here's what we're going to consider. Probably on their side, you're going to select people or accept people who are economically more viable individuals. People who have been educated, can speak English, can contribute to the economy, because that's what their political will is about, right? Showing that these individuals are useful to the economy. Sit down. No, we tell you the rhetoric of a refugee to begin with in the first place shouldn't be one that we only take you in because you can be transactionally useful, but because out of the empathy and the goodwill of our hearts and like our position as bigger developed countries allows us the ability to do so. Therefore, we think it's fundamentally problematic that they are emboldening the rhetoric in developed countries that the only reason why we should take in refugees is because they can serve some kind of economic purpose. Here's where we argue that the entire topic of opening house and even Adil's speech, right, is a fundamental argument about where does the political will come from. But the moment that you allow the political will to be led by individuals who only see refugees by their economic capabilities, you allow the political will to be tilted in a way that's always going to be utilitarian, which means the poorest and most vulnerable individuals don't get the help that they necessarily need. And here's where we revise some part of OO's kind of like point about women and children, right? Or rather expand it to mean individuals who are vulnerable refugees. These individuals could be individuals who have been constantly bombed in their home states, right? Who don't have reasonable education to a specific level that allows them to be employed in higher tier jobs and get some kind of work for the economy done. They are literally going to be either your farmers, your gardeners, like your kind of like Mexican field workers, right? This is essentially the kind of people that you're going to have who are the most vulnerable and the most towards to them useless individuals. And we think that's who you owe the greatest duty to. Because here's where we draw the real distinction in where the difference between a refugee and an economic migrant is. The economic migrant has skills, right? The economic migrant has some kind of ability to contribute to the economy because he has some kind of education, has some kind of mechanical ability in some aspect. But beyond that, what the economic migrant can do is can apply for work permits and other such things. The refugee more than not has no other ability to do so or no other channel to do so. But beyond that, the refugee who gets deported on their side because he's not economically useful has to return to a country that is constantly getting bombed. And he's probably not going to even fucking find a job there, right? Because look, these individuals, as we conceded, are individuals with the least skills who are the most vulnerable individuals and should be the biggest recipients of aid in any kind of welfare system, which is what we are trying to gun for, right? So we don't think it's funny for them. I think it's funny for them to say that the political will should be garnered because you are utilitarian and you can bolster this kind of utilitarian calculus or utilitarian purpose, because the greatest moral duty is owed to the individuals who are most vulnerable. But sure, Virat.
We told you why state small duty does not go away, but can you give me the reason why refugees are unskilled and cannot contribute to the economy at all and they literally have nothing to do with education, etc.?
No. I'm saying that, okay, here's where we understand the nuance and the spectrum of refugees that may come in. People who are educated, who are financially literate, whatever, right? These individuals will get thrown on your side. But the people who won't are individuals who cannot prove some kind of economic wealth to the country, whether it means being able to participate in some kind of manufacturing industry or whatnot. We are arguing that these individuals perhaps are the most vulnerable and who should be the ones who are getting refugee status. We argue on your side, you far less refugees or you only sift out refugees who are economically viable, right? We argue that that's the most painful and hard, like that's the most awful rhetoric by which to decide who gets to deserve aid by the amount of privilege that you already have access to. That's ridiculous, right? We argue the system of being a refugee fundamentally works on the basis of empathy, that you come from the shittiest of states, you are in the most vulnerable position, therefore out of the goodness of my heart, I ought to do this. Here's what we talk about then government rhetoric and the kind of perception that people necessarily have. Because it's untrue on opening government side that people are going to see you, or they're going to ask you a refugee permits on the street, they're going to know the difference between a refugee and an economic migrant because it's not clustered on their foreheads, right? But what we necessarily want to create is a social environment where individuals are willing to accept refugees because they recognize that refugees require help, require assistance, and that could mean educational subsidies, or that could mean places in universities or educational opportunities that they never had access to. So these individuals could potentially be very, very unskilled on our side. But we want to create a social atmosphere where the society begins to recognize that it's not because they can contribute to the economy that we should help them, but because we should help them because they're in the worst of states, and it's our moral duty as individuals who are privileged in the developed world to do so. Because the rhetoric they are emboldening on their side is a society that allows only the individuals they emboldens a far right rhetoric, for example, that only individuals who have economic ability should get in. And furthermore, we think it's an idea of fast and a lie on their side for them to tell us that the immigrants have a good life anyway, right? Or that somehow the moment that you get it as an economic immigrant, your life is immensely better. The reason why Brexit even happened was because individuals within these conservative states even thought immigrants stealing their jobs was a shitty idea, right? We tell you that immigrants don't have much better a life. We tell you it's all about how society perceives immigrants. And the way society needs to perceive immigrants is to reduce the rhetoric that they are transactional items or economic units within your country, right? So this argument and this entire debate is about what kind of political will we are trying to generate. Not so much whether it's a quantity of political will. It's the kind of political will and what direction it moves the governments towards. And we think that this moves governments towards greater accountability and greater empathy, right? Because we think for far too long the rhetoric has grasped Europe and held countries like Greece and like Germany has shackled these countries is the rhetoric that these refugees have to be economically useful before we'll take them in. The very fundamental problem is that it doesn't recognize and it shoves a lot of problems under the carpet. Problems such as individuals not even wanting to give refugees a job to begin with, or not even wanting to give them some kind of economic opportunity to begin with because they are just different and they are other from who we are. We think that that's a necessary rhetoric we have to fix in the first place, not by showing that these people should be economically useful before they come in, but that regardless of the state that they're coming in, we owe it to a duty to them to try to elevate their situations in life. We think the fundamental basis of a rhetoric of a refugee is because these individuals come from far worse countries. The urgency exists. And we think on their side, they increase the timeline because how are you going to administer these tests that show their economic viability, right? We've never really heard the administrative process on their side. We think it's going to be longer because you have to prove some kind of economic validity to fulfill your version of political will. Whereas on our side, we think it's a lot more about goodwill, which is a lot more, it returns back to the basic notion of what a refugee basically is. We dignify refugees and we make their fight a lot more worthwhile, both sides.
Yeah.
So side opposition has been yapping over and over again for God knows how many speakers saying, oh, you guys are so fucking picky and like, oh, we're only going to choose those that actually work. But hell no, we tell you not. We've said time and time again, okay? They claim that economic migrants are going to get legal permits. But hello, the reason why they swim like 10,000 fucking years is because it's clearly not enough. They said that their government, you're going to ask your government to like go and help you. Hello, the reason why they're leaving is because their government does not help them at all. You think they're going to leave for fun? Or like, oh no, I'm just going to leave for fun now. No, they want they want a better life. They want something that, they want to go to a country where they can actually work and put food on the table for their family members and not leave them behind in wherever the hell they're suffering in. Like, I sometimes I don't get why opposition is like being really oblivious about this, where we actually told you time and time again that we will accept both refugees and economic migrants because they are literally almost the same people. They are both suffering. Okay, there's no bloody hell distinction between them. They mentioned that They mentioned that economic migrants We already said economic migrants are people who are trying to make their lives better. Okay, that's why they left. They spent like 10,000 fucking centuries to come into a country. Okay, and then they're going to say that. Sorry, and then moving on to my next question, how do we best save them now? We already told you again, no ma'am, that we will take them all in now rather than waiting for 10 years for them to stabilize their refugee camps and actually help them. I think that it's better for us to save 50% of them rather than leaving 100% of them to die and suffer in the refugee camp. Where they say, oh, refugee camps are like and shit and stuff. That's why we are trying to help them and make their life better so that they can prosper and put food on the bloody table for their families. So we already said we can't take it all, but it's better. Like we said, it's better we take them in now than to kill more lives and make everybody suffer. So moving on to my third question. On how do we ensure that refugees and economic migrants are taken in for the long run? So they claim that our policy causes discrimination and backlash, but their point is that, but actually they are the one that cause it more, because Aiden has already mentioned in his extension that they are not even helping the countries like Greece and Turkey to manage their refugee camps, and that makes situation much more worse, and everybody is screwed over and everybody's just gonna die anyway. So we believe that in their side they don't even like help anything, whereas for our side we're actually doing something for them, giving them jobs and shit for them to actually like do something with their bloody lives. So and then they say that they want to create like a social environment that's like friendly to refugees, and oh, we love you refugees, we're gonna hug you like every single fucking day and give you roses outside your door. But hell no, we tell you no. Like first of all, how is your policy even going to help that? They have not mentioned like, how we are going to, oh, we're gonna like love you all the fucking time. Like, they don't even say, they claim it, and then they think that it's like a magical world where fairy princesses are dancing across the rainbows, and they think it's so easy for them to do that. We tell you that no. And already, I has already mentioned that we are the better ones because we solve the damn problem and we actually do something about it. And so like basically what like opposition is trying to say is like, so for example, when a economic migrant swims for like 10,000 years to a country, so opposition is gonna be at the gate and like, no, go out. Like that's basically what they're trying to say. But when a refugee does it, they're like, okay, come in, we're gonna like bring you blankets and shit. But you must realize both of them are suffering the same amount of things in their country. That's why they left. Like I've said many times in my speech, like, do you think they just leave for fun and like, oh, I'm gonna go to a new country now because like, yay, more money? No, because they don't have any money. The government can't support them. That's why they left. Simple. I think a 15-year-old can explain to you the meaning of why they left, because they don't have any resources in their country. That's why they want to leave. Like both of them deserve the best. Both of them, both refugees and economic migrants deserve deserve the best, and that's why they swam across the bloody ocean for like God knows how long. And opposition is trying to like, okay, no, just go back to your country. We tell you no. The reason why like we take economic migrants and refugees is that not because like, oh, we are all like so good, but we're trying to help them also. So both sides actually like the people in the country benefit, and the people and the refugees and economic migrants both benefit. So that's why we're taking all of them in, and we don't think that there should be a distinction. No, sir, there should be a distinguished line between them, because they are all the same, and they're just suffering as much as the next refugee does. So by telling them that, oh, we're only going to take refugees because they're so important, that itself is discrimination. And I think side opposition should be so bloody embarrassed of themselves that they think like, oh, we're only going to take the refugees and not economic migrants because they don't matter. Because we tell you that both lives matter, and the government of the country should be able to take both sides. And if they can't manage refugee camps in like Turkey and Greece, then God knows who will do that, and both of them will suffer and die. With all these reasons above, I'm very proud to propose.
Hashtag all lives matter.
Hey, peace out. I'm glad for my work. Let's go. I would like to make a public apology at this point. I might have given my advice to mountain school while the coach is not here.
Mr. Speaker, I find this debate frustratingly confusing because the way that PM set it up already was incredibly squirrely. From the moment that he told you that economic migrants and refugees are essentially the same, that means that their burden is to prove that conclusively they are entirely the same, their struggles are overwhelmingly similar. We argue that if we can prove there is a substantial difference between the plight of refugees and that of economic migrants, we argue that therefore there is a meaningful distinction between them. I'm incredibly frustrated with the way that Adil decided to squirrel the meaning of economic migrants. I don't understand how this is even acceptable, because just listen to the kind of rhetoric that he used to describe economic migrants. He said that they had absolutely no option. They had to pack their bags and swim across 10,000 miles to get over to some country and then somehow have a work permit to enter these countries and find a job. We argue that this is not the characterization of what economic migrants are. What Adil is talking about is a refugee. If Adil cares so much about refugees, we're happy to help those refugees on our side. Those are exactly things that Val talked about. What exactly is the characterization, or what's the most likely situation we're talking about? Think about the Bangladeshi workers in Singapore. The fact that they come from countries where they have very little income, they are not able to find jobs that can help them support their family very much, but they do have houses, they do have families, they do have access to some things. They just need that money to be able to access these rights even more. So they are able to contact agents that help them fly over to Singapore, where they have work permits after they've been vetted by these like companies or whatever agents that allow them to even come to these countries in the first place. When they come here, they are not like completely helpless. They have some items with them. They actually have dorms where they stay. Unlike refugees, where you can visibly see them in refugee camps without any place to stay, trying to find blankets or some like modicum of dignity, in like even trying to find warmth or like scrounging for food. We argue when you're talking about dignity and the visibility of what constitutes a refugee and an economic migrant, we argue Adil and in fact the entire government has tried to squirrel away what an economic migrant actually is. I'm going to argue that there are two meaningful clashes in this debate. Why is the distinction so important in terms of the government duty? Second, how do we give dignity to refugees? Because that was a question that Adil posed to us, and that's how we respond to it. Why is the distinction so important in terms of the government duty? OO says that the basis, and actually the basis for most of the argumentation for why this is so important that we treat refugees differently is because UN says so. We argue there's a larger idea here, and Vel argued to you that human principles cannot be diminished as less important than economic principles. Just because utilitarian calculuses are sometimes more easy to point to, this does not mean that it's somehow more important. We argue that refugees need to be treated with the principle of empathy. That's what she talked about. Economic metrics are never the only considerations for governments. We understand that people in these countries are able to empathize. We argue that we should push this principle as far as possible. Governments have a unique duty to people in the most vulnerable and the most shitty conditions. These are the kinds of people that we need to reach out to. What's the likely comparative? What's the problem here? OG was deplorable when he tried to label them as all the same. They argue that the refugee struggle is completely the same as one of economic migrants. We argue that it's unique because they are fleeing for their lives. Their homes have been lost. They were unable to say bye to the people that they cared about. They are unable to make prior arrangements for the kinds of lives they would have in the country they are going to. They do not swim across thousands of miles across the ocean. Instead, there are very clear delineations between an economic migrant who is going somewhere where he knows he has a job versus that of a refugee who has a completely uncertain future. No, thank you. What's the difference with economic migrants? They are moving out of their own choice. They are able to say their goodbyes. They are able to consent to leaving in the first place. They have the option to opt out, and that's the meaningful difference. If the Bangladeshi worker in Singapore feels that his life is so completely unbearable, he actually has the ability to say, I don't want to work here anymore, I'm going back to my wife and my children. That's the meaningful difference, Mr. Speaker. OG said that some refugees have skills but are not working. We argue that the problem is that we're just not giving them jobs. That's an easy fix. But even if there are not enough available jobs, he said that doctors are not doing anything. doctors actually are. That's completely untrue. Doctors are actually living and treating people in the refugee camps. Teachers are trying to give children education so that they don't fall so far behind. Whatever you try to allege about refugees and people with skills is completely nonsense. What's the effect? Val specifically argued this when she told you that there's an administrative problem when it comes to giving these people the help that they so desperately need. Aid is often can only go to these refugees when the administration can agree on how to legislate this giving of aid. We argue that the conflation on their side creates a horrible time lag because now the immediacy of the crisis is diminished. When you cannot make a meaningful distinction between the immediacy of the problems of refugees, no thank you, and the problems of economic migrants, which arguably are a thing, we argue that you diminish the ability for aid to go to these people, most basic of needs to go to these people. No thank you. It's worse when you can now put a burden on them to be economic migrants, this Val's argument, and we argue that some skills are just so different, they are unable to integrate sometimes. You also diminish the potency of the discourse in society because you cheapen and diminish the immediacy of aid given to them. This means that yes, the treatment sometimes may be worse when you brand them all as foreigners, but you increase the sense of distinction. This means that people are going to likely, we have no idea what actually the alternative for what you're going to call them is. We argue that on the ground, people are just likely going to refer to them as foreigners to increase the distinction between people who are not part of your country. We argue xenophobia happens worse on their side. How do we give dignity to refugees? We argue that we need to understand that social integration happens better on our side when people with privilege are able to reach out and give these people food, water, a warm piece of clothing. When you are able, moreover, we argue that removing the distinction worsens the integration because you refuse to acknowledge that there's a difference between refugees and economic migrants. We argue that all the problems associated with economic migrants that they wanted to project onto refugees as well is going to make this distinction even worse. Worse still, we argue that oftentimes an absence of basic rights is often linked to a lot of social problems, like for example, crime, etc., etc. When they're pushed into a corner. We argue when you deny them and you rob them of this ability to access basic rights, in fact, you worsen that perception towards these people. You make it even harder for them to socially integrate into the places that they are. For all these reasons, we argue we give dignity to refugees. We argue we draw a meaningful distinction between economic migrants and refugees. We are very happy to take this debate.